Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities.
Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are joined by Steve Sorenson. He is the Senior Director of Learning and Culture at Johnsonville. We've all enjoyed, I'm sure, at one point or another, a product or two out of your guys' massive global operation. They've got about 4,000 employees worldwide, but headquartered in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, with about a dozen or so production plants. Interestingly enough, 85% of the workforce are operations. And when you hear the expression, right, you know, the science and the secret of making the sausage, you guys really have that down. And today, Steve is going to be sharing with us, how do you accelerate your career? And what are those 3 speed bumps that could potentially stall you out longer than necessary, with some great tips on how to navigate those accordingly. So Steve, great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. I'm excited to be here. And anytime we can talk about some of the things that we're doing at Johnsonville, we're really proud of our culture. We're really proud of the things that we're accomplishing here. One thing that's always an interest is, when you talk we have 4,100 employees across the globe. The only correction I have is we don't have employees at Johnsonville. We have members, and we don't have bosses and supervisors. We have coaches. So we believe those words matter for us as a culture. And I'm excited to be here, and hopefully everybody hears this and goes, I need to go out and buy some Johnsonville sausage tomorrow.
There you go. If that that'll pay for the podcast then, right? Well, I really do appreciate that distinction, because, words, imply meaning and an affiliation and relationship. So yeah, I would always drive me crazy when folks would refer to the staff, right? Because I think I have a health background, right? So a staph infection, you're like, that is, or even better was rank and file, which to me is like, what you smell in a locker room, but yeah, we use team members. Now that we're employee owned, we actually use owners. So, that is a trait that we share. But just to give our listeners a little taste, you had just shared with me some fabulous news. I mean, the perspectives you're sharing today really do come from a world-class operation when it comes to employee engagement. So tell us a little bit about your trends and your most recent global engagement survey. Those were pretty mind-blowing stats.
Yeah, what I'm really excited about is we have a team of folks, and there's a colleague of mine that works with me, one of my direct report members, that leads this survey. So we do an annual survey. It's to all of our members across the globe. And we measure a couple things. One, we look at what is our participation rate. How much are people going in and actually filling out the survey, writing the comments, things like that. And this year we had an 89% participation across the globe. So 89% of all of our members eligible to take the survey took the survey, which is a great, great accomplishment. And then we always measure, coming out of that, what is our member engagement score? So it's the questions like, there's 2 questions that come out of it. One of them is, I would recommend Johnsonville is a great place to work.
Yep. That's the internal net promoter score equivalent, right? Yeah.
Yep. Exactly right. And last year we were at 77% of our members saying, I would recommend Johnsonville is a great place to work, and satisfied with the work at Johnsonville. Doesn't mean we don't have work to do. And the comments that we get are so unbelievably helpful. I'm actually this weekend reading through all of the different comments. So we roughly get about 5,000 comments that will come through. Some of them are very small, some of them are very long, but it's a great process to go through.
Yeah. It's amazing because you get statistical relevancy pretty quickly on your sample size. Plus or minus 5% is somewhere around 20% response rate, right? But to get 89% just shows that, this matters to me. And I think it's really amazing too, because again, such a large percentage of your workforce, they're not sitting at keyboards all day long, right? They are in a plant, working with the machinery and the equipment and the supplies and all the ingredients and the packaging and distribution. So that there's an extra hurdle sometimes in these types of assessments to really get access to those types of members. So I think that's just really a beautiful beautiful stance. So it kind of gives our listeners a sense of like, we're talking to a gent that is at the top of his game, and yet it took you a little bit to get there, right? So I want to, everybody's like, well, it's easy for him, of course. He's got a great organization, just parachute in and just, reap all the rewards. And it's like, no, you kind of had to earn it. So Steve, tell us a little bit about your first gig. When did you start getting into the business and realizing that you could make a difference with others?
It kind of goes back to some of my early days before Johnsonville. I've been lucky that I've really worked for 3 organizations. My background was originally in radio. So I actually spent time as kind of that old style disc jockey, back in the early 90s, of sitting in a room, kind of like this small conference room, talking to myself. And I know it feels like you're talking to somebody, you're talking to the public. And I learned how to communicate some, empathy and my tone of voice differently, and even the body language. How you do that verbally only can be a really tricky spot. And then I moved on to another organization, spent 17 years there, learned a lot of great things about human performance and human development. And then I was able to come to Johnsonville and use those skills.
Could you give us the name of that middle organization? Because that's also something that is a well-run company in many respects and brings a lot of nostalgia for folks. What was that one?
Yeah, so it was the Schwan Food Company. So my first gig there was, if you remember I always call them the yellow duck trucks. That was my...
You're a Schwan man.
Absolutely. I was a Schwan's man. I drove around Fargo, North Dakota for 3.5 years, visiting people and getting to know their families. So you learned a lot about how to interact with people, how to communicate with a wide variety of people, to be quite honest with you.
Did you see, even in a community, the amazing different perspectives and how people greet the door, and people who are outgoing and friendly, and people are more guarded and reserved. And, you're just like, wow, it's just, so many different aspects that you got to see that sampling across. Now you started at that point. Not only did you realize you can make a connection with an audience, and we'll come back to your point about, body language, even when you're on radio, right? But there was something kind of unique that somebody spotted in you as a talent when you were doing that Schwan Mad route. Somehow you kept getting tapped for something. What was that?
Yeah. Whenever we would hire somebody brand new, they would put them with me. And I don't even know what it was at the time, right? It was either how I communicated with them, how I gave them ownership to, like, I'd go up to my customers and I'd let them just run and say, okay, you're doing this. I'd introduce them and I'd just kind of stand back. And I think that's a tough thing. I've even learned that now further on in my career, now directly coaching multiple people, and at one point, hundreds of people, is to not just take control. And, we're going to talk about making decisions and things like that. How do you it's one thing to delegate the ability to do a task, but also can you delegate the authority to make the decisions? So that started me down this path of training and development that has taken me well into my career. And if you would have talked to me when I was running routes for Schwan's that this was what I would be doing, of helping Johnsonville kind of craft and simplify our culture and redefine what our core values are, I would have been like, what are you talking about? So learning those skills early on, sometimes you don't even know that they're preparing you for things that you may not be using or that you can bounce back on even 10, 15, 20 years later.
No, those seeds get planted. And I think, sometimes folks earn their career are like, this is just a gig that I'm doing. This is just, I haven't really figured out where I really want to be. And I'm like, do you believe it or not, every little seemingly trivial occupation or volunteer activity that you do early in your career, gives you skills, like you said, that you'll be able to use, skills you'll be able to fall back on, strengths that you got reps in that later on will come totally naturally to you. I think that's pretty awesome. So that was your start, kind of bouncing around. And then you realized that, hey, I got this opportunity to go to this great company. So tell us about your initial entrance into Johnsonville and then how it kind of unfolded there.
Yeah, so I came over to Johnsonville not in a learning development or human performance function, but more of an organizational performance. So I was brought in to help us lead our continuous improvement journey. How do we work more effectively, more efficiently, those types of things. And I was very more of an indirect to operations type role. And at the time, I was talking to my coach and I said, I'm curious and I'm interested. I want to explore more about getting into direct operations, like leading a plant, coaching a large group of folks. And that's what I tried to find when I was at the Schwann Food Company. It just never seemed to work out. So found this way at Johnsonville. And one of the things that I really appreciate at Johnsonville is a lot of organizations out there use their people to build their business. And at Johnsonville, we have a philosophy of how do we use the business to build our people. So we try to build in these processes that we can, as we're growing, as we're developing. So I actually had the opportunity, it's what we call a 5-star. So we've identified 11 development opportunities. Could be things like you're going to work with new people, success is going to be very visible, it's a large-scale project, whatever. There's 11 of these. And if whatever project or position you're going to jump into meets 5 of those, then we call that a 5-star. So what I was able to
do... Let me anchor on that for a second. I think that is a really great distinction. And again, not every person out there will have a company that provides these, but there's no reason I, as a manager of a squad of 10 people, I could come up with like, hey, here's 11 things that, we're looking for in career development. And if we get, 3 to 5 of those locked in, then man, that is a juicy opportunity. Could you maybe give a couple other examples? You don't have to give away the secret sauce of all 11, but maybe a couple of the factors that a team lead might be considering to look out for their folks with.
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost is not even against these 11 developmental opportunities. It's, am I meeting or exceeding what's being expected of me every day? Right? Am I already being somebody that's delivering at a high level? Too many times we see people that are looking for the next opportunity, but they're not delivering on their basic expectations. So that's kind of a price of entry, if you will. So it is things. So
totally agree.
Things that we talked about, you're going to work with new people. You might be leading a brand new team. That would be another development opportunity. There is a clearly defined success and failure criteria. Like we will know this was successful, this was not successful. It might be a new innovative program or project that has failed in the past, and we need now to help that lead. So those are a couple of the other examples of what are in those 11 developmental opportunities that we call them.
Okay, wonderful insight, little bonus material there. Okay, so you've got this great leader that, is helping you kind of look at these opportunities using this rubric. So take us from there again, Steve.
Yeah, so I had applied for a couple plant director roles and didn't get them. So I went and talked to my coach, who was the vice president of operations at the time, and just said, ironically enough, his name is Steve too. I said, Steve, I'd like to get into more direct operations, like being a leader for our operations inside the organization, because if 80% of our population is in operations, that's how I can learn more about the organizations, how I can stretch and grow, just be more valuable as an individual contributor to the organization. So at that time, we happened to be parting ways with a plant director at one of our remote facilities. And typically when we have a harvest plant that we are trying to find a plant director, they're just harder to find because they're remote, they're small towns, things like that. So he said, well, the thing that's holding you back is this experience of leading a large group of individuals. If I'm going to put you in charge of a plant, the largest group you've ever led is 21 people. So I'd like to extend you into this 5-star opportunity. I want you to go down to this remote facility, and I want you to step into the plant director as an interim role. You'll be the person in charge. You'll be driving the culture there, responsible for the metrics, all of those things. But it's going to be leading a group of 300 people in that facility. So you've got, I think, of coaches and coaches and coaches. But the nice thing is at Johnsonville, we look to, hey, you know what? How do you stretch and grow and learn? And I know you're going to make mistakes. That's how you learn. We also have this other phrase we like to think about with development is if you're setting a development goal and it doesn't want to make you puke in the sink a little bit, it's probably not a big enough
much
stretch.
Of a stretch. Oh, I like it. You got to have some butterflies. Yes.
So I was like, okay. So I committed to a 6-month stint and had 300 people that didn't directly report to me, of course, but I had a leadership team and then they had a group and so on and so on. And it was really about 2 things. How do you help the operational efficiencies while you're down there? And how do you start to help transform the culture of that facility to be more aligned with the Johnsonville way and our ethos statement? And after about 3 months of felt like it was going pretty well, building some good rapport, had up my normal one-on-one with my coach. And I just said, hey, what's your impression look like? How's it fitting? What are you seeing? And he just kind of went dismissive and just said, I have no concern about you leading a large group of folks. I've seen it. You can do it. He said, I figured you could, right? I saw that in you. That's why I gave you this opportunity. Mm-hmm. He said, yep, you were able to prove it out and quicker than I thought.
Well, and I think as the higher level authority in that relationship there, he saw your potential, and he believed in you, but he also was like, that's by itself not sufficient to say, okay, right? It's like you now need to create the conditions where you can evidence it. And I think that's wise, for the other Steve to have done that. And it's actually very compassionate and supportive of you, because it gives you, a little bit of a minor league run to be able to test some, do some tests. Like, I mean, you don't take a pilot. It's like, I've really got the skills to be a great pilot. I'm telling you, like, I was born to do this, right? And I'm 18 years old and I'm telling you I'll be a great pilot. And then the first thing to do is they get in the plane. No, you get in the simulator, dude. Like, and that's not degrading you. That's not saying I don't believe in you. You need time in the sim before you strap on those jets to your back. So I think that's such a misunderstood thing. It's like, why are you holding me back? Don't you believe in it? It's like, no, I'm doing this because I believe in you. So that, and you really took to it. That's great.
Yeah. I think about all the things that they entrusted in me. And I think back to the old quote. I'm a kind of a big quotes guy, so you might hear me say a few during this podcast, but it's, trust in God, everybody else bring data, right? It's, I want to trust that you can do it, Steve, but you got to show me and you got to demonstrate it. So I stayed down there for 7 months. We had hired a new plant director. I didn't want to just bail. I wanted to make sure he was onboarded properly. And then I came back and I was getting ready to go back into my continuous improvement role. And a new position opened up that was the group director of ready-to-eat operations. So I moved right from that plant director 5-star into now coaching 3 manufacturing facilities. So now I had 3 plant directors reporting into me. And then I spent the next 7 years learning more than I ever thought I would about direct operations and how to lead and how to coach directors, which it's a very different world because they are the primary leadership in their facility. And I don't want to override those pieces. So I might come back to that when we talk about decisions of how that overriding it can really be detrimental for you.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Well, that's that first, speed bump is, you're missing some evidence, right? The data that you talked about. And, it's one thing for somebody to say, well, it's because you don't have X. And then that's the end of the conversation. Instead saying, well, you don't have X. So let's look to find us the most proximal thing to X we can get you with a 5-star opportunity in your guys' parlance, so that you can then evidence that, and that's what it builds it. Again, to repeat, I love that you're like, but that means you still have to be thriving in your current role. And it's like, I think that's a precursor to be able to have access to those opportunities as well. So you're on this journey, Steve, and I want to connect the dots between kind of 2 things that are happening. You kind of alluded to a little bit earlier in your role as a DJ, and like, how do you visualize yourself having a conversation even with your body language, and then also as you're expanding in this realm of responsibility, some of the things that you were learning about, the use of strengths, playing to strengths, but also potentially the overuse of strengths. So tell us a little bit about some of the things you learned on that journey and connect some of those dots together.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about that overusing a strength, and when you overuse it, how it can become a weakness almost, or almost like a career staller for you. So what I think about is, when I think about how you communicate your message to folks, it's more about how they interpret it rather than what my intention is when I communicate it. I think of the analogy of, if I'm a quarterback and if I'm passing you information and you're the receiver, if I throw a pass 10 feet over your head, you could never catch it. I get tracked with the incomplete pass, right? That it's my stat sheet for my career. If I throw a perfect pass, hits you right in the hands and you drop it, even on purpose, I still, as the quarterback, get tagged with the incomplete pass. Now, the receiver can get the new stat of dropped passes, but that leads me back to how well you interpret the message is still a lot on my responsibility.
I don't quite have a quote for that, but it's a sentiment I picked up from Tony Robbins. It's that notion that, great communication depends all on the receipt of the message. The best intentions in the world, but if you really want to be a great communicator, you care about receipt, not just transmission. And I think that's kind of the analogy you just shared is about that. It's like, look, I still own that. Even if I can't be whole, I don't control it, but I still own it. And I still am the one who suffers the consequences of an incomplete pass.
I think that's the most important message to me, Lee, is I'm still going to face the consequences if my message isn't received in the way that I intended, or if it's a mixed message and you just don't understand it at all. I leave thinking, oh, Lee's got the message, no problem. He's going to start moving. Lee's like, I didn't get that at all, but I'm going to do you got it.
And that's sometimes the hardest to detect. It's like, it's one thing if somebody says, no, I'm confused. You're like, oh, okay, we can clean this up right now. They're like, totally got it. And they're like, totally don't.
I think some of that comes back again to me is what am I doing or not doing that may or may not create a safe space where that person can ask me the question of, hey, I don't understand. I know you explained to me, I don't get it. If when you do that, my tone of voice gets agitated or my nonverbals are like, how do you not know that? It doesn't invite you to ask the questions in the future. And I think about, I've drawn this for hundreds of people.
All right, I'm guilty. I just got my therapy for the day. Thank you. About the third time, you're just like, I do this look, and it's like, and the look says, what the heck's wrong with you? And it's like, dude, don't do that look. That doesn't help. So, yeah.
So when I think about interpreting message, it's this pie chart. I've drawn this for probably thousands of people over my career, but it's just a pie chart about communication, and it's broken into 3 quadrants, 7%, 38%, and 55%. And one of those is verbal, tone of voice, and nonverbal. And then I ask people, well, where do you think they belong? And a lot of people get it wrong, but 7% of how people interpret my message is the verbal words that I use. 38% is the tone of voice, how I say it, the inflection in my voice, all those things. And then 55% is what my facial expression is saying, what my body is saying. And I'm a firm believer, Lee, that if you and I have an interaction, your interpretation of how that interaction went is more reflective of reality than what mine is. Because I'm not going into that conversation thinking, I'm going to be a jackwagon and I'm going to show Lee how smart I am. It's no.
Yeah. Well, and then if there's, like you said, a mixed message in that, the words are saying one thing, the tone is saying something else, and the body language, they're more likely to believe the body language or the tone than they will the
Absolutely.
words. And I think to your point, and the research you're referring to here, I believe it's originally Morabian, who's the scientist who, did these studies. And it's about the impact, right? In terms of, conveying, and that's what leadership is it's influence, it's impact. It's, it's not just transmitting, hey, Steve, you won the lottery ticket. I don't think you care what my body language or tone is saying in that case. You're like, cool. But when we're really looking to communicate more complex business stuff, that range. And what's interesting is I have this ongoing debate with some people. They think that if you're on the phone, or in your case on the radio, that just means the 38 and the 55 just go away, and now it's only, or at least the 55 goes away. Now it's only your words and your tone, and somehow those are a greater percentage. And I'm like, no, our bodies were built and our brains were designed well before, asynchronous and non-visual communication, So when I'm listening to you on the radio, it's still there. It's just now I, as the receiver, I'm filling in that gap. I'm imagining what Steve looks like. I'm imagining what Steve's doing with his body right now. I fill in those gaps, and, that you have to then over-index on making sure your tone and your words are, like, I'm laughing right now, I'm leaning for. So you send those additional signals because they're there, just whether or not you have control over it or not. And as a leader, I think we discount that 55-38, and we were just like, but what I said was, and it's like, that's not what landed.
Yeah, I think about that when back, like he was talking about in my radio days, is if you walked by the studio, it looked like I was having a conversation with somebody, right? My smile was on my face. I was animated. I was using my hands because you can envision that through the radio versus if somebody's just sitting in front of a mic and just talking, it affects your tone of voice and the monotone. All of a sudden, if your eyes are open, all those things, you can just feel that energy in somebody's voice. And it's the same thing when you're communicating with people. The words that you use are one thing, but boy, that tone of voice and the body language are so important, even when it's over the phone, in a Teams message, whatever the case is, and they can't see everything. But I think that's such an underutilized piece. And what's funny is when we think about some of the harder conversations we have to have, we spend a disproportionate amount of time on what are the words I'm going to say versus how am I going to say it, and what's my body positioning going to look like? Am I going to be standing up? Am I going to be sitting down? All of those things matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And the things that show up in tone, like I was literally just was working with a group of about 4 or 5 leaders handling a very sensitive conversation. And in that conversation, certain members were like really getting anxious about this particular production issue. And, those of us who have been around a little while were like, going, those are, in the scale of things, they're like this, but the customer is feeling it, they're like this. And I'm like, if you go into that and you have any notion of dismissiveness or discounting or like, calm down, you're overreacting kind of a thing, right? Even if those aren't your words, if it comes across that that's how you're feeling, they're going to then go the other side and say, you're not taking this serious enough. And they're going to freak out and panic and escalate it. On the other hand, if you come in with a tone that this is very serious and I'm being very diligent and, and you lean forward and you're modulating this way, even if you're saying all the same things, you're saying and then they were like, oh yeah, no, this isn't such a big deal. And then they went on the other side and they calmed right back down. And they're like, that worked. And I was like, I'm texting him as I read on the Teams message. And I'm like, yes, no, more, higher, slower, less, more. And he's like, oh my God, this is exhausting. I don't think this way. Right. Cause this guy's a military guy, and he's just like, I just charge straight ahead. And I was like, not with this crew, man. So he nailed it. And his boss was on it and and the customer was on it. Like, oh, that was great. But it's, if you can be intentional about that, you can actually steer the outcome of that conversation, the sentiment, and whatever he's going to go forward and do with it. So definitely a skill to master. There was one other thing you were about to share a little while ago about things you were learning during that time or experiences you had. So tell us a little bit more about the next learning that you had on that journey.
When I was there, one of the things I noticed is how when I'm communicating with people, it's exactly your point. Sometimes I can be a little bit too serious on things, right? I mean, I'm a bigger guy. I've got crew cut, haircut, all of those types of things. And when I think, typically I get a more of a closed in face and I'm thinking through it. But if people don't understand what that is, the strength that I've always had is I've been able to connect the dots really quickly, right? But when I overuse that and I can't communicate with people, how did I get from point A to point Z that quickly? I need to be able to explain that back and say, okay, how I'm thinking that way, or the reason I got to that is because of these, and I'd walk through some of the key variables. And then you could just stop and say, am I missing any key variables that we should also be looking at? And that's something I learned to do with this larger group, because when you've got the head of safety and the head of quality, and the head of operations and the head of engineering sitting in your office, and we're walking through and talking about what's the plan of attack, what should we be doing? And you say, okay, well, yeah, I heard everybody, we're going to do this. And you get that look of, what are we doing? And maybe people won't say it, but you have to interpret and see. I can see by your body language, you guys were curious about how I got there maybe. Let me back up. So I learned that, but now I just go through that more systematically to say, okay, here's what I'm thinking. well before I get to the answer. So I can say things like, okay, so Lee, what I'm hearing you say is the most important from your aspect is A, B, C. And John, what I'm hearing from you is X, Y, Z. Maria, I'm hearing A, B, C. Okay, based on that, I think the direction we need to go after is this way. What am I missing? And just by offering that back out there, it helps explain that thought process. And it isn't, you just learn those things that I wouldn't have learned with 21 people, but having a larger group of folks. But now that I have a smaller team I've got 4 folks that are leading our culture and training strategy across the organization, and they have all direct reports under them, I can work well with that group of folks and build a really cohesive team.
Oh, you just occurred to me when you were describing that about your process, right? I take this person's input and that person's input and that person's input. I thought, you're describing making sausage, Steve. Like, that's your sausage making process for making a decision. Like, I take all these and I was like, okay, now taste test. Are we missing anything? You're like, a little more malt, a little more salt, a little more, right? Like, that is the process. And you're making it transparent versus this black box of like, I'm a walking algorithm and I just spit out, answers, based on my personal genius. It's like, it might, maybe you're really good at it, but, by bringing folks along, they can better understand the intent. I think they can also better learn that skill for themselves. So that was beautiful. Now that's if you're the one making the decision. So you kind of alluded to the situation about decision making, especially with a broader, larger, more diverse team. So you're not always the person with the D. So tell us a little bit about that aspect, Steve.
I think about that of when I've been on teams. So I'll start there where senior leaders have come to us and said, hey, here's a problem we've got, and we need to solve it. And then we form a team and we start working down through the process. And I'm sure your listeners in here have been through this scenario, that you're part of a team that's been tasked with.
So trigger warning. Okay, there's some scars out there we're going to dig up with this story. So, okay, everybody's been more notified. Let us have it.
and you're part of a team tasked with solving a problem. And I mean coming up with and then implementing the solution. So that's what I mean by that. And in one such case, I was on a team and it was communicated that the team was in charge of just that expectation. Identify the root cause, craft up whatever appropriate solutions you think, and then make the decisions and execute against that. And we're like, okay, great. So we go in and we head down that problem, and I think this is what it's going to be. And then what ends up happening is you get what I've heard a colleague of mine say is a non-durable decision. We make a decision, we start taking action, and then a leader comes in and they overrule it because it didn't align with what their thought process was. And what I learned from that was at the beginning of whatever team you're on is just, let's be clear about the empowerment of it. Is it A, you're just looking for ideas and options and a recommendation? Or are you looking for us to implement and solve it? And if it usually comes like, well, yeah, we want you to implement and solve it. Okay, so our decision is going to be what it is, and we're going to go with that. And what that's translated to me as is when I work with my team, I have a principle that I didn't develop up, but I call it the Simon principle. And I'm sitting with members on my team, and they'll come to me and say, hey, here's what we're thinking. We want to do A, B, or C. I'm like, well, you're Simon on this one. And if you've ever played Simon Says, when Simon says that's what we're doing, then that's what we're doing. So I'm like, you're Simon, you make the decision, and I will back you up no matter what it is, even if I think it's the wrong solution. Now, I'm not going to start them out on, curing cancer. I'm going to start them out with something pretty small, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, you're building those muscles, your evidence, the strategic thinking, the critical discernment skills, right? But I like the Simon Says, like, oh, this is a Simon Says. And you can differentiate that to be like, okay, in this case, I want you to take it this far. Sometimes I call it the recommend and then we'll act. And then the other one might be we'll act and then advise. So, let me know what you did. And you're like, wait a second, this is going sideways, boss. Well, don't just keep fighting the fire without me. Like, let me know if it's going sideways, and then we can, get more resources involved. But like making that distinction very clear, so you know how far down that line of delegated authority you have. And when it's Simon, you got it, baby. Right. Even if I got reservations, right? What a great standard. So was there, a moment in an interaction that you had perhaps when you're on one of those blue ribbon process improvement teams where you're like, well, wait a second, like what happened here? And I recall you got some good advice from somebody saying, hey, if you're not willing to bring it up here, why are you
Yeah,
talking about it?
this was early in my career. We were sitting in a departmental meeting, and our director was talking about a direction we were going, a decision that was going to be implemented. And it was one of those decisions that we've heard it 100 times. Like if you've got a corporate bingo card, you could check off the bingo box. And my God, I've heard this. Yeah, nothing's going to change. And everybody in the meeting was looking around and nodding heads. Yep. No, this makes sense. Let's do it. And when we left the meeting, I was talking to a buddy of mine at work, and this was back when I was at the Schwan Food Company. I said, Lee, we're talking about this again, but we're not actually going to do something. Nothing's going to happen because of this, this, and this. And the member looked at me, and at the time, I didn't appreciate it as much as I do today, but just said, Steve, if you're not willing to bring that up in the meeting where we can actually talk about it and use it to solve the problem, then I don't want to hear about it. And then the initial response was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, you're probably right. But it leads me back. It really was. And I think about something that I've instilled with my kids and even with the folks that I've worked with is you've got to take responsibility for your actions in the time of your actions, not when you get caught. And what happened there is I was able to take responsibility when he called me out. He caught it. And I'm like, yep. But I learned like if I have something that I need to share in a meeting, I need to take responsibility for my actions at that time, not later on, not if I get caught. And that's led me down to with my kids, with me, with the folks that I work with that report to me. I always say it's easy to make the right decision when everybody's watching, right? But how do you take accountability for just doing the right thing in the moment and not wait for it to get caught?
Yeah. Well, that's really, demonstrating that response ability, right? Like I am the one who has the ability to respond, that whole notion of being proactive and taking that responsibility. And if I shirk that, it might feel safer. It might not be as scary. But then I've just given away my power, and let's say that you attempted to, ask a question, you attempted to illustrate a risk that wasn't being considered. If you're doing it from a place of contribution, I think that's also really important. If you're doing it from a place of judgment, well, now you're just a jerk, right? If in that meeting, I just raised my hand, I said, you guys all know that's dumb, right? We're never going to do that. Like that, you're not contributing, you're just judging. Versus like, hey, I hear that we really want to take, make progress on this, and I know that there are some things that are going to get in our way. And so I'd love some support on how I can help remove those obstacles. And then everybody's all like, well, we're all saying that or thinking that, but we're not saying that. Like that's a way of saying it with contribution. And again, back to your further point, saying it with a tone of curiosity, saying it in a tone with, servant, hood, versus disdain and dismissive, like that will all make that particular moment go down better. And if in the moment they're like, shut it down, Scott, we don't care. Well, okay, I did what I could within my sphere of influence, and now the dominoes will fall where they'll fall. But I think you can at least walk away saying, I did my best with what I had to work with.
I think you hit on a really, really good point there is if what I'm bringing up is just to criticize or run down or minimize it rather than to try to help us get to a better solution or a better implementation plan, well, that's not helpful, right? That's just me being a jerk, right? I go, that's a dumb idea. And I sit back and say, well, what makes it a better idea? Yeah, I don't know, but that one's dumb. It's like, no, you've got to be ready to contribute to that. So, going back to the decision-making with like my team, what I've found that works best for me is the best way I can find out if I can trust someone to make good decisions is to trust them, is let them make some decisions. I have found it so much easier to develop poor decision-making habits than indecisiveness. And if I'm creating a habit that's causing people to, relegate the decision to me or not make the decision, then I'm not building leaders. And I think it all comes back to, as a coach, I'm here to make good things happen for other people. It's not the other way around. They're not here to make my life easier. I'm here to make their life better as a coach. And if that's not the role that I want as a coach, then I should look in the mirror and say, you know what, I probably shouldn't be a coach. And that's okay. I think that's what people have to get well with, is that's okay. Because I like to think about it this way, Leo. If we were having interactions with folks and in conversations, if I went into it with the thought process of, okay, what if I were you? What would I want to hear? And what if you were me? How would this interaction be different, or how would it look to be different? Now, that doesn't mean I don't still have to have hard conversations with people or set expectations, but I am a firm believer that if people know what to expect, like what does great look like for me, for their role, and how I'm going to measure it, and if they know if they're winning or losing throughout the day, boy, they're gonna rip the roof off. They're gonna do so many great things. But if I don't share that with them, then that's my fault.
Yeah, I do think, even when we talk about delegation, sometimes I see folks, they think delegation is abdication. And that's not true. Like, even in a delegation, we're still aligning on expectations, right? We're still saying, well, hey, the end zone is here. We are that's the goal. We're headed, west, young man. And so that's still, I think, an important part in that relationship that you shared. But you're saying, okay, now everything after that, or to this point, that this is now on you, and this is when it comes back. And I think as you extend that and you expand that, further down that life cycle of decision making, and for higher level complexity and challenging decision making, like you said, that's how people grow. They don't grow by sitting on the sidelines watching you just do the same thing over and over again. And like, oh yeah, well, one day when it's the championship, I'm going to do that. It's like, you got to get them on the field, and then you're on the sidelines and you're like, okay, well, that the goal was to make the touchdown. We didn't connect on the pass. Let's break that down. Where was it at? Where were you hesitating? Where were you not connecting the dots? That's how they actually build that skill. And that takes some courage. And so, I mean, you said trust. I would say courage and a little bit of faith on top of that.
I think it's easy to want to be the hero, to be the person with all the answers. I remember when I was coaching the 3 plant directors, I had a member from the production floor that wanted to take on a special project and wanted to do some certain things, right? Don't need to get into all the details. But they had gone to their coach, who was the operations coordinator, and then to their coach, who was the plant director. And the plant director said, well, here's what I think you need to be doing. The person wasn't happy with that, so they came and asked me. And after I sat and listened to it, I said, well, this seems like this is an answer that Jake would be able to give you. So what did Jake tell you about this? And he told me, and I said, I think that makes sense. I think you could also probably look at this and this. I said, but I think Jake goes, well, you could just make it happen, right? You could get me off the line. And I said, do I have the authority to pull you off of your line? Absolutely. I said, but what does that do to me undermining a plant director? If I'm going to override his decisions, why do I even have a plant director? Because at that point I don't, because I have a figurehead that's just doing what I want to do. And it's like, that can't.
Yeah, you have a human router. You don't have a leader.
That's exactly right. So I go back to some of those things of, how do I, if the expectation is that person's going to make the decision, and I've already told them, you're it, I think we have to make sure that we treat and respect folks through that process. And if they make a bad decision, if it's going to be like, it's going to really hurt the company or really hurt members, then you step in and you explain, this is why we can't do it that way. But you do that in a one-off, right? You don't necessarily do it in a public forum, but if it's something small, like, we're going to order these purple binders and instead people order blue, okay, that's probably not going to be the end of the world. It's not a big decision. So let people start small, fail early, coach them through the process. Because I think you had a great point. If all they ever see me do is how am I making decisions, how am I leading, and I never let them do it, well, when I go to put them in that position, they're not going to be ready. They're just not.
Well, Steve, this has been very, very helpful. I appreciate your willingness to be transparent about your journey and, how things kind of, the pieces fell into the right place as you collected those experiences. Let me just recap a little bit here for our listeners. So, you're on that career journey. You might not necessarily see, where it ends for you, but, have a little faith that you're picking up the right pieces. And when you get to that point where you're looking for a particular next level or a different level, be okay identifying I am missing a piece, and be intentional about asking for opportunities to evidence those. And then how you do that was a great example. How do you be impactful in your communication to avoid misunderstandings and mixed messages by being mindful of aligning those three things? And then we also talked about that, really getting clear up front about what exactly is the level of delegated authority. Is it to the recommendation? Is it to the implementation? Is it for a pilot? Is it full Simon Says? You keep going until somebody tells you to stop. I like that kind of delineation there so that we don't get frustrated, that it didn't go forward, but also we have the opportunity to build those decision-making muscles. So those are all just great tips that anybody coming up through the ranks can be seeking to cultivate. So thank you for sharing those, Steve.
I think about I am who I am because of other people, right? The feedback that they gave me, the opportunities that they gave me. But to your point, I have to raise my hand from time to time and be an advocate for myself. And how I can control that is I need to first and foremost be an expert at what I do every day, be someone who can be counted on to deliver results. And if you're working hard and you're delivering results and you're speaking up and asking questions, opportunities come that way. It's not going to come to the guy sitting in the corner or the gal sitting in the corner that's waiting for someone to come and tap them on the shoulder. You have to be able to express that and advocate for yourself as well.
Yeah, and that's not being a jerk, and that's not being pushy, and that's not being bossy. That is showing you care and you want to contribute. So speaking of caring, you got a heart of gold. Thank you for spending your time with us today. How can folks stay connected and model what you're doing in your organization for theirs, or at least just be excited about the food they eat and where it comes from and the kind of heart and hands that go into it? How can folks stay connected?
Yeah,
with
the
you,
best
Steve?
way is just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm checking LinkedIn every day. So if you look up Steve Sorenson, Johnsonville Sausage, I'm the only one you're going to find. It'll be this guy with a white beard. And I love to stay connected with folks of just let's share ideas, let's share posts, things like that. And just check out Johnsonville's products. There's, our members, I have worked for food companies. I have worked with other food companies, and our members care so much about the quality and the safety of our products because they understand that the food that they're making, it's meant to be a joyous occasion, and they want our members to be enjoyed, or our products to be enjoyed by members, by families in the backyard barbecue, and they just have a great time. We're a fun food. It's a fun organization, and so go have some brats, go have some summer sausage, go enjoy time with your family. Life's too short, but enjoy it with some Johnsonville brats.
Yeah, well, you got me hooked. That's what I'm planning to do tonight. So we're going to go get up in the woods a little bit here and have a couple of buddies of mine around a campfire. And I think brats are on their way. So, Steve, thanks again for sharing your wisdom and your journey. It's been an inspiration. And yes, keep leading those folks out there and unleashing other leaders out in the field. Thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Lee. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.